Wait. Let's start from the beginning. Hi everybody. It was January 2019. At that time I decided to focus on another huge passion of mine beside music. Computer games. I love them, I play them since my childhood, and because part of my personality is a nerd who likes programming and computer stuff, I decided to create one by myself. Well, and that's the beginning of my game, Nodes. And because I think that the whole game production process is truly fascinating, I would like to share with you how I brought everything to life. So, let's jump right into it. First things first, get in an idea. Nodes is a minimalistic logical game. This type of games are probably one of my favorites. They are easy to play, fun, and it always fascinated me how much you can achieve with just a good idea and a minimum visual components. The main characteristics of these games is a catchy and easy to understand logic. And during my musical journey, when I delved deeper into the music theory, I noticed exactly this type of logic. Don't worry, you don't have to know anything about music theory at all to play my game. Still, let me explain what's going on in a simplified way. Imagine every music piece as a huge timeline. This timeline is basically our well-known music sheet. For better orientation, music sheet is divided into small parts called bars. And bars are filled with musical information, known as music notes. The most common way is that you can fill a single bar with a maximum of a single whole note. However, a whole note can be divided, and you can fill bars with the smaller notes, for example, 2 half notes, or 4 quarter notes, and so on. But at the end of the day, all put together, it's always a value of 1 whole note in a single bar. Well, and that's it. That was the foundation of my game, and I was 100% sure that I can build something upon it. Unfortunately, just an idea is not enough and you have to develop it. So, my next goal was to find a game mechanics. It was clear to me that nodes in my game will be some kind of squares or circles or whatever, and you will have to somehow move them and connect in the bars. But how exactly? What will be the rules and main goal of the game? I was really struggling to answer these crucial questions. After a few days I realized that I had taken a totally wrong approach. I tried to invent everything at once, which just not worked. Instead of that, I chose a different strategy and I started to focus on each game element separately. Firstly, I established a main goal of the game in the most fundamental way possible. I came up with an idea that when you connect 2 whole notes, they disappear, and when the music sheet is empty, you win. That's it. And after that, I started to add different obstacles to complicate player to achieving this goal. Obviously, I added different note types, so by connecting 2 half notes, you get 1 whole note, and by connecting 2 quarter notes, you get 1 half note. Next, I added notes which you cannot move, different color notes, and finally something out of the musical context, teleports to move notes from one place to another. All these elements should be enough to put a game together, but the problem was that everything was still mainly in my head. But it's finally time to get my hands dirty. Time to make graphics and animations. Fortunately, the simplicity of my game required simple graphics. But even though it was not complicated, it took me some time to make it right and find a combination that worked. I ended up with a light background with a soft gradient. For music notes, I chose square tiles, and for music bars, simple lines. And every game also contains user interface buttons, which had to be designed as well. Once the graphics was done, I could use it to make the animations. Here is the deal. In every game, when something is happening, you have to show it to the player. So, for example, when node is created, there is an animation for it. The same when the nodes are blocked, or 2 nodes are connecting together, and so on. To create an animation, you have to move graphics frame by frame, and once you play all these frames in a fast sequence, it visualizes the desired motion. For example, when a node is created, it's growing frame by frame from very tiny to bigger and bigger until it reaches its regular size. And then, when you play it in a fast sequence, it looks like this. For this purpose, it's necessary to work with an animation software, where all these little video sequences can be made. This way I created all necessary animations, and then I could finally move on. But to be honest, so far we are still at the easiest part of the job. Now comes the real deal, because if you want to have a game, you have to program it. Programming itself is a truly complicated subject, but let me explain core concept, at least from my point of view. Imagine everything you see in a game as an individual virtual object. Every node is an object, background, button, and so on. And every object contains its own information. For example, size, position, animations, and many more. A whole game is basically a big group chat where all the objects communicate with each other and they ask about the information they need. But they have to ask the right questions. And to tell them what to ask is the role of a programmer. So let's say I want to move my node to the right and connect it with another node. In a game, it simply looks like this. But behind the scenes, a very important communication is happening. It takes only milliseconds, but during that time, all the participants have to clarify what to do. I hope things make sense so far, because here is the catch. To create this conversation, you have to use a programming language. So in reality, this conversation looks something like this. We call this a source code, and it's filled with instruction lines so we can tell objects what to do. To create a game, you really need a huge amount of these lines. My game is one of the simple ones, and my source code still needed almost 3000 lines to make it. I am definitely not a great programmer, and it was a huge challenge for me, but surprisingly after 3 months I programmed all game mechanics and prepared my first testing levels. My excitement was at its peak, and it looks like I could finish the whole game very soon. Everything was absolutely great, but actually it wasn't. It wasn't at all. And let me explain why. When you are working on something and you know every detail about it, it's easy to lose an objective point of view. Once I sent this testing version to my brother, I found a hard truth. My game was far away from perfect. For the first-time player, it was almost impossible to find out what's going on. It was hard to understand the controls, nothing was intuitive, and after playing it for some time, you would probably rage throw computer out of the window. It turned out that I just overcomplicated things. I'm not going to bore you with too many details, but basically in my first design you could store more than one node in a bar at the same time. And this created an unbelievable number of combinations and chaotic situations that could possibly happen. What I changed was that I allowed only one node per bar, and this decision made all the difference. From this point, everything started to make sense. I threw away around 1000 lines of unnecessary source code, simplified everything, and finally the controls were intuitive and any player could immediately understand what's going on. So, the crisis has been resolved, and now it's time to make all the levels. When it comes to level design, I had to think about a lot of things. For every level, I had to decide where exactly every node will be, how many nodes are going to be used, what will be the difficulty, and make sure that every level is solvable and fun to play. I found out that the best way how to go through this process is to make a physical copy of my game. And so, these bad boys are coming to the scene. I made all the nodes from the wooden tiles, and I cut the bars and the other elements from the hard paper. With these props, I could easily and quickly simulate every game situation. My strategy was to start with the simplest levels so the player can understand core mechanics first, and then gradually increase the difficulty and make it more challenging. So, step by step, level by level, I started to design. And when I successfully made and tested a level physically, then I put it into a PC version. It was an exhausting process, but finally after 2 months I created all 50 game levels. We are almost at the end, but there is still something missing. So far, player can see what's going on, but can't hear what's going on. Therefore, it's necessary to make the sounds. The sound design was definitely the most fun. Even there were just a bunch of sounds, I decided to create them by myself. And what was the fun part? Well, when it comes to sound design, it's really all about your creativity, how to achieve what you want. So for example, when you hear the note moving, it's actually a tennis ball on a piece of wood. When notes are merging, it's an opening of a big plastic egg. And when note is blocked, it's actually me smashing a book into a chair. Adding sounds really helped, but it still felt kind of empty. And that emptiness could be filled only with music. In such a simple game, you really don't want anything complicated, because it could distract players and ruin their experience. To me, to compose something for this purpose was thankfully kind of easy. As a guitar player, I naturally chose this instrument and tried to make something simple. Eventually, music ended up being a slow ambient solo guitar with a simple arpeggios. And because in-game music is going in loop, for a whole soundtrack I made 4 different songs to avoid being too repetitive. And once I put it in a game, it was unbelievable how it helped to glue everything together. So, after exhausting months of work, I was finally standing in front of the finish line. But one last step was needed to take. Send my game into the world. For those of you who play computer games, a platform called Steam surely sounds familiar. For those of you who don't, Steam is the biggest online marketplace for computer games. You can find thousands of games here, from the biggest publisher names like Rockstar or Bethesda to the smallest unknown individual developers like myself. My goal since the beginning was to release my game here. In order to process it, I had to register as a game developer, sign all the contracts and tax documents, and pay a product submission fee. After that, I had to prepare my store and library pages, which contain different types of commercial graphics. To clearly inform players what's going on, I also had to make a video trailer, game screenshots and descriptions. Well, and of course, the most important thing, I had to have a game and upload it to the Steam servers. Even though this publishing part was not the most complicated thing, it felt like eternity to make it. But step by step, I overcame even this obstacle, and my game was finally released and available for everybody to play. And that's it. This was the production process of my game Notes. From the point zero to release, it took me around 7 months to make it. It was definitely a huge challenge for me, but looking back, I am extremely thankful that I pushed myself through it. Well, and if you are a game player, you can check it and play Notes by yourself. It's available on Steam, also with a soundtrack, and it costs just a few coins. And if you are willing to take an extra step for me, you can also leave a review on Steam, which would help a lot. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I know this wasn't directly music-related content as usual, but I hope you learned something interesting today. See you next time.